Hello, my name is Mark Gibson, and you're listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, a weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming.
Good morning. You're all very welcome to this morning's Signpost Series webinar, which is brought to you in association with Dairy Sustainability Ireland, National Rural Network, and Food Drink Ireland SkillNet. My name is Tom O'Dwyer, head of the Signpost Programme with Teagasc, and I'll be your host for this morning's webinar. On this morning's webinar, I'm joined by two Teagasc colleagues. Dr. George Ramsbottom, head of the Signpost Advisory Programme, joins us to tell us more about the Teagasc Signpost Advisory Programme. And I'm also joined on the webinar this morning by another colleague, Méabh O'Hagan. She's one of our new climate action and sustainability advisors working on the Signpost Advisory Programme. And Méabh will help me with questions later on the webinar. Good morning to you both, George and Méabh.
Morning, Tom.
Morning, Tom.
George, you're going to talk to us on this morning's webinar about the Signpost Advisory Programme. Before we start, maybe for our listeners, could you tell us a little bit about yourself? You're new to this role, but you've had a long career with Teagasc.
Thanks, Tom. I'm 30 years in Teagasc in a month's time, so it was a fast 30 years. Most of it has been spent. A few years were spent initially as an advisor around the country. I did a master's similar to an MAIS that Méabh has done. I did one in Wexford in 1992, so it's well before Méabh was born. And then I went along and I joined as an advisor down in Tipperary. Spent a couple of very happy years down in Tipperary, and then a couple of great years in Wicklow. And then I went and I worked in HQ for 6 or 8 months in Sandymount Avenue before they pulled it down. And that was in the PR department. It was a great experience. And it certainly made me certain that I didn't want to work in an industrial or a city setting. I wanted to be out in a more rural area. But it was a great experience. And I got back then to Kildalton to work as a dairy specialist. Spent a year on an exchange in New Zealand, and the guy that replaced me was sitting beside you in a shared office in Kildalton. And I came back then, and I've worked as a dairy specialist in Kildalton, Grange, and Oak Park. So I've been around the block a fair bit now at this stage. And then was lucky enough to get this role from the role working with the Signpost Advisory side of the programme in April of this year.
Okay. Right. So you're bringing all your experience as an advisor, as a specialist, and as working in PR, in your experience in PR to bear on this new role, I guess. So George, over to you then.
So I'm just going to talk to you, bring you through the advisory element of the Signpost programme. So there's 3 or 4 different parts to it. I would consider Tom more the industry facing side of it, and I'm more I would consider the farmer-facing side of the Signpost programme. That's how I describe it. So there's kind of 3 pillars to the whole climate action piece that Teagasc is engaging with. On the right-hand side there, you can see the centre I call it the climate centre, basically. And it's been headed up by a team mostly based in Johnstown at the moment. So they're working, it's a virtual centre, they're working on some of the newer technology that we need to bring along with us to try and achieve the targets in terms of climate that have been set for us. The second key element to the programme is in the middle. That's the Sustainability Digital Platform. It's kind of the fancy name for AgNav, really, is what it's about. It's what the core of it is. And we'll come back to that in a few minutes because it's central to the work that I'm involved in. And the element on the left-hand side then, or the third pillar, is the Signpost Advisory Programme. And to me, that's the piece that I'm working with. And I'm going to go into the details of that now in a second. So this is a very large and very cluttered board. It's one of the boards we have to describe what we're doing in the Signpost Advisory Programme. It'll be presented in Moore Park on Tuesday next at the Dairy Open Day. Why should you sign up? You should sign up to track your own carbon footprint, see what initiatives you're engaging in and what the impact of those initiatives and what the new technologies you adopt can have in your carbon footprint. Why you should sign up as well is because many of the actions that you can adopt are good for you and good for the environment and can deliver both positives from an environmental perspective and even more money in your pocket. Engaging with climate actions will present opportunities for your farm, and the consumer is demanding a lower carbon footprint from the food that we produce, which is fair enough. What's the program about? There's 3 elements to it. There's the know your number part, which is establishing what your carbon footprint is. There's the commitment to change, which is about putting a plan in place or an action list in place for your farm that will help to reduce your carbon footprint. And then there's the support that we can offer in terms of making sure that the actions are adopted. What to expect from the program is over on the right hand side. So we'll talk a little more about the team that we're putting in place, of whom Méabh, who's on the team here today, is one of those advisors. There'll be workshops and training opportunities to learn more about climate change and reducing your emissions. You'll be offered one-on-one advisory support to implement the changes on your farm, and you'll be invited to events and demonstrations to show the new practices and technologies that you can engage with.
George, sorry, just one moment. There's a couple of comments in on the Q&A. Just can you press hide on your, just there. That's great. Sorry. Perfect. Thank you.
That's actually showing is that shapers. Another more technology that I have to adopt myself. And the Tom, your kind of focus is on the Signpost demonstration farms. This is the cohort of 120 farms around the country that are our flagships for the kind of climate action initiatives that you can take to reduce the carbon footprint. And this is a kind of a cohort of farmers that the participants in the Signpost Advisory Programme, which is up to 50,000 farmers between now and 2030, can use as templates for the change that they're going to make on their own farm. Down in the right-hand corner there, we've a QR code that brings you into the Signpost Advisory Programme website on our own sites here, and you can sign up for the program, or you can find out more about the program using that QR code. So if we look at the Signpost Advisory Programme, then there are 4 core elements to it that everyone needs to be aware of. The first is it's available to all farmers, and we need to engage with as many farmers as possible. The second key element to it is that it's an enhanced advisory and training support program, in which we have 21 specialized advisors. I'll come back to them in a minute, and who are dedicated to delivery of climate action initiatives on the maximum number of farms. When you engage in the program, you will establish your number, your carbon footprint. We'll help you to do that using the AgNav tool we're going to come back to in a minute. And we'll help you to generate a plan or an action plan or an action list for your own farm to help you to reduce the carbon footprint that you have. And we have a really ambitious plan that we need 50,000 farmers participating in this program between now and 2030. There's a massive target of a 25% reduction in gaseous emissions between now and 2030, and we need maximum participation in the program to achieve that target. Why are we focused on kind of a dedicated program for the Signpost team? Well, there's 2 reasons. The first is to accelerate the adoption of the technologies that are already there. And if we're honest about it, we can see that the technologies that are already in place will reduce on average the carbon footprint or the gaseous emissions from farm by about 18 or 20%. But it's also to have a team in place to support the adoption of future technologies. These are the ones that are being developed at the moment. So for example, things like the key one would be around methane inhibitors at ruminant level, because ruminants are the largest emitter of greenhouse gases in the country. So we're working on technologies to reduce the amount of methane that they produce. And we know that methane can be a fairly potent gaseous greenhouse gas, basically. So we need the advisory program. We need a dedicated team to accelerate the adoption of technologies that are already there, and to be there to support the adoption of the emerging technologies or future technologies that are going to come on stream over the next number of years. The other reason for the Signpost program is to highlight the progress that's already been made through advisory work and on farm. So if we look at some of the technologies that are already available, and we're working on. We're working on the promotion of technologies like low emission slurry spreading, on the use of protected urea, on a big focus on the application of lime, which will result in a lower requirement for nitrogen fertilizer. The protected urea has a massive impact on the emissions gaseous emissions coming from fertilizer. And we know that while it's a difficult enough technology to adopt, in my opinion, the incorporation of clover has huge potential, because it has a massive impact on the quantity of nitrogen that you're going to require to produce decent yields of grass for grazing and for silage. Now, if we look at maybe some of the progress that's been made over the last number of years, if we look at the uptake of protected urea, for example, in this area here, we can see that there's a very slow but gradual increase in the proportion of nitrogen that's been applied in the form of urea. The blue bars are for dairy farms, and the first three columns here refer to the national situation. So by about 21, about 10% or so of the protected urea, of the nitrogen used on dairy farms, was coming in the form of protected urea. It's been slowly increasing, and you'll see a rapid uptake in the next couple of years. If we look at the Signpost dairy farms, it's gone to about 35 or 40%. And we know it has a massive impact on gaseous emissions on farms, and it's a really positive story. On the beef side of the house, there's been a slower uptake, but having said that, in 2021, on the Signpost beef farms that Tom is engaging with, almost a quarter of the nitrogen that they used was in the form of protected urea. The story is even more positive when we come to low emission slurry spreading. And again, it's another area of progress that we'll be highlighting over the coming years. So the proportion of slurry applied using low emission slurry spreading technologies, you can see it's ramping up substantially. And it's almost 75% of slurry spread on dairy farms is coming in the form of low emission slurry spreading technologies. And it's about a quarter of the slurry spread nationally on beef farms. And again, if we look at the Signpost farms for 2021, that compared to their national average counterparts, they're using nearly 90% of the slurry spread on dairy farms was spread using low emission slurry spreading equipment, and almost half of the slurry spread on beef farms was coming from low emission slurry spreading technologies. So the purpose, I suppose, of the Signpost program will be to highlight the progress being made on farms, and the purpose of the Signpost program is to put out exemplars or kind of farm leaders who can show the initiative in terms of adopting the technologies that we've there. What kind of steps can you take? Now, we know taking steps are hard. So we have messaging going out, and it's available to all farmers around the kind of the core steps that you can take on different farms. So on the left-hand side, it's around dairy farms. On the right-hand side of this slide, it's around beef or suckler farms. So a lot of the core technologies, they're ranked by their ease of use. So things like protected urea and lime and soil fertility are down near the bottom. They're relatively easy to adopt. And maybe using low emission slurry spreading equipment is down for all types of farms down at the bottom. Further up along the line, you have things around better grassland management, which may be more difficult, but also really important and very impactful on gaseous emissions. You've improved animal health and improved genetic merit for dairy and beef farms. You've increased output per cow in terms of milk solids production or calf live weight, and then reducing age at first calving, and clover incorporation, maybe the more difficult one, but in the long term it'll have a massive impact on our carbon footprint. So there's loads of steps out there, and we have tailored messaging for dairy, beef, and dairy farms, beef farms, suckler farms that are available for you to engage with and discuss with our Signpost advisory team. Our team has just been put in place and is just starting to work. Maybe I think that's you on the left-hand side there in the team. We had a training day back in April for the team before they actually started in the role. Tom, you're in the photograph there hiding behind Seamus Carney. And the team is spread from the north of Donegal down to Kerry and over to Wexford. So the team now is just being put in place and is open for business and is starting to run a series of workshops. That's an important message. So they're now on the ground and starting to engage with farmers in terms of gaseous emissions. we're launching the program throughout the country. So you'll probably be aware of the series of launches that have already taken place. This is a picture that I launched about 10 days ago in the Carlow, Wexford, Wicklow constituency, and we invited industry players, the IFA, ICMSA, ICSA, the different farming organisations. We signpost farmers at it. We had county council people at it, and we had other industry players who will all be influential in the coming years to try and drive home the initiative for us on farm. We're running these launches on a regional level because it's important that the industry and the farming population in general are aware of who the signpost advisors are that they can access or contact to move the initiative along in their own area. Look, we're starting with the low-hanging fruit, and what I mean by that is we're dealing with farmers who have already applied. We're starting to contact farmers who have already applied to join the programme and participate. The details have been allocated to the different regional units and they're being distributed to signpost advisors at the moment. The other areas of kind of people who will access fairly quickly is existing discussion groups and farmers who are involved in irrigation, or farmers who have a lot of contact with their advisors on the ground. By the middle of June, we'd completed around 20 workshops with around 200 farmers already engaged in those workshops. So just in terms of the actions that you take, is the first step along the line is to apply for the program. Then at the workshop, you will establish what your number is, your carbon number is, what kind of gaseous emissions are being produced, and we'll give you your own carbon number. And the second step then will be to prepare the plan. That'll be done sometimes at the workshops, and sometimes it's been done as a kind of a follow-up. Step 3 then is support by the local advisors or the signpost advisors to support delivery of the plan, of the action plan that you develop for your farm. And we'll be monitoring the trends and actions taken in terms of greenhouse gas emissions for the individual participants and for the wider industry over the next number of years, and establish what's going on. So for most people, it'll start with a workshop, but it doesn't necessarily mean a workshop for farmers. How are we establishing the number that your carbon number is through the AgNav program that's available to us. So we'll get you to give us consent. We'll get farmers to give us consent to access their gaseous emissions number through the AgNav program. So for this farm here, we've established that the carbon number or total emissions for his farm is equivalent of 1,000 ton of CO2 equivalent for the farm. Where that data is coming, or those data are coming from, they're coming from the Bord Bia sustainability audit. We've linkages with them, strong linkages with Bord Bia to establish the sustainability survey data for individuals' farms. And we're also linking in with the data coming from ICVF. So the AgNav program is dependent on a three-way initiative between Bord Bia, ICVF and Teagasc. And the three of them are working really closely to develop the AgNav program. So we establish, first of all, for the individual, what their greenhouse gas emissions are. So here it's 1,000 ton of emissions of carbon dioxide equivalent for the farm in question. It's a large-scale dairy farm. The emissions per hectare then is calculated using the data from the sustainability survey. So it works out for this farm at almost 11 ton of carbon dioxide per hectare. And this is a specialist dairy farm. So we know that the emissions, his carbon footprint per kilo of milk produced is working out at 0.78 kilos of CO2 equivalent per hectare. Now, one of the things that's being developed in the AgNav, and it's not all there yet, but some of the actions can already be generated. So we can say that for this farm here, that if he looks at going from, I think it's 25% use of protected urea to 90% use of protected urea for this particular farm, the impact of that on his gaseous emissions is to incur a 3.5% reduction in CO2 equivalent. So he's down from 101 tons to 98 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent from his farm just by taking one simple action over the coming years. And the value of the AgNav is twofold. Number one, it tells us what the number is, and number two, it allows us to see the impact of individual actions and sometimes combined actions on the carbon number for that farm. So once we know the number, we have a huge starting point to make change on the farm. The second step then that the climate or the climate advisors or the signpost advisors will make is they'll help the farmer to pick the most suitable actions for their farm. And so for example, this is a kind of a mock-up of what the farm plan would look like for an individual. So in this case here, some of the initiatives that he's talking about taking will be to improve soil fertility and increase the length of the grazing season on the farm. So the second step will be to create an action list for the farm, and then there'll be ongoing support by the signpost advisor of the program participants to ensure that the actions are carried out on the farm. At the Moore Park Open Day, we'd love to see as many farmers come up to us as possible in our climate village, and we're going to give them a card going away. They'll grant us access to their AgNav program, and once they grant us access to that, we can tell them what their total emissions in carbon dioxide are, what their emissions per hectare are, and what their carbon footprint per kilo of milk production is. And we'll give them an opportunity then to sign up for the program on the day and generate an action list on the day for them to reduce their carbon footprint. So we'd love to see as many farmers engaging in this initiative as possible. So I suppose finally, my last slide. What am I saying in general? I'm saying, look, we have a very clear target to work towards in the 25% gaseous emissions that have been set for the sector. Knowing the carbon footprint on individuals' farm will give them also a very clear target that they have to work towards in terms of gaseous emissions reduction. We have now just got a dedicated team of advisors in place to help farmers, to work with farmers to reduce those gaseous emissions. We have technologies that are now in place to substantially reduce the gaseous emissions from individual farms. And research is ongoing, and I'm confident that over the next couple of years, we'll have the technologies in place to achieve the 25% gaseous emissions targets set for the industry. But people need to engage with the program and take actions to ensure that they achieve the targets that have been set for them on an industry basis. Tom, I'm going to leave it at that. I'm going to stop sharing here now, and we'll take any questions that people may have for us. Is that okay?
Thank you, George. Thanks very much for a very comprehensive presentation and a great overview of the new Signpost Advisory Programme. So I know there's questions coming in on the Q&A function on Zoom. So just to remind listeners, if they want to submit their questions, they can type them into the Q&A function. And my colleague Méabh and myself, we're keeping an eye on them, and we'll select those and put them to you, George. Before handing over to Méabh, I just have one question which occurred to me as I was watching your presentation. It didn't feature it hasn't featured in the chat yet, but it's one that occurred to me. So I'll just put it to you, and we'll get to the questions and the Q&A then. I was struck, George, by the rapid adoption of less technology. You showed a chart and you explained that there's been there has been a significant increase in the usage of low emission slurry spreading technology over the last couple of years. And I suppose two parts to my question. Why do you think that happened? What was the reason for farmers adopting that technology so rapidly? And I suppose the second part then is some other technologies that you mentioned as well through your presentation. They're a harder sell. They're slower uptake. And would you speculate maybe on why that's the case?
Look at Tom. The first part is a combination of stick and carrot. That's about the lower emission slurry. If we're being very honest about it, we've seen rapid uptake of less lower emission slurry spreading, mostly on dairy farms, because a lot of the dairy farms are operating at a high stocking rate. And some of these are in derogation, and it's been a mandatory element of the program for them for a number of years. That's the kind of the stick side of it. But there's also been carrot. What's happened as a result of that is we've seen contractors in particular, and a lot of farmers buy the equipment themselves, and they're seeing really great benefits from using low emission storage bedding. Any farmer you talk to that uses a trailing shoe or the dribble bar would tell you that there's a noticeable improvement in the amount of nitrogen that they're able to generate from that slurry and using that slurry. You can see the difference. So it's spreading now by word of mouth as well. It's a fantastic technology, and even though it's an expensive technology, there's a pretty reasonable payback in terms of the benefits that they're seeing both from an environmental and from an economic perspective. So it's a combination of the two, Tom. Now, Tom, you and I both know then that for the adoption of technologies, whatever the technology is, there needs to be a number of elements involved, and the key ones around things, we'll say, for example, like clover, would be: can it be broken down into small parts? So the answer to that is yes. Is it easy to adopt? The answer to that, honestly, is no. It's not simple. It's not easy to get clover incorporated unless you're reseeding, and we don't reseed an awful lot a year. So this is going to be a much slower burn. The benefits are clear to those who've used it, but it's a slower burn in that it'll take quite a number of years to get incorporation of clover successful on many farms. It'll take time, and it's dependent on a lot of moving parts. So you need reasonably good fertility, you need lime working well, and grazing management, particularly in the establishment phase, is more complicated. So that's going to take a bit of time as well, Tom. So things like clover incorporation will take longer to get adopted. But Tom, that's why we have the Signpost Advisory team in place, and that's to help with the adoption of things that Méabh's only dying to get out on farms and help farmers to adopt those sort of technologies. So some of them are relatively easy to adopt, and more of them are going to become more complex and longer term. And there'll be twists. As I say to people, there'll be a few bends on the roads. It's not all going to be sunshine and roses. There's going to be a few gloomy days as well when things didn't work very well, and we'll take a bit of time to straighten out.
Okay, thanks, George. I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Méabh, who's been keeping an eye on the questions. Just a reminder again, if you want to ask a question, use the Q&A function, and we can see those and we put them to George. So over to you, Méabh.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. The questions are coming in thick and fast here, George, especially in terms of the AgNav system. So okay. I might throw a few of them over to you. I suppose the first thing is, how do farmers access AgNav themselves?
So farmers can access AgNav themselves if they go into the system and look it up through their ICBF account. The AgNav program at this stage is available to them through that system. So
so using the same login details as ICBF.
My understanding is that's correct, yeah.
Okay, perfect. And then in terms of what's actually accounted for in AgNav, are the likes of hedgerows and carbon sinks and sequestration, is that accounted for in AgNav, or what's actually accounted for in the calculation of the carbon footprint? Yeah,
so unfortunately at the moment, the sequestration benefits of hedgerows is calculated separately and isn't currently included in AgNav because it's not part of your agricultural carbon footprint. It's calculated under the land use and land use change element of the calculator at the moment. It's calculated completely separately at the moment.
Yeah. And then does the farmer need to be in Board BIA to get picked up by AgNav? And then just in terms of maybe farmers with either mixed enterprise or with tillage and sheep, then is that being pulled into AgNav also?
So just at the moment, we cannot generate a figure for the sheep farms. And to generate a figure for the beef farms, all the dairy farms are included because all the dairy farmers have a sustainability survey done. But in total, there's about almost 60,000 farms who've completed a sustainability survey. And once we have that survey, we can generate an AgNav or a carbon footprint number for them. So they need to have a sustainability survey done. The weakness at the moment, honestly, is the sheep. We don't have the sheep data available to us to generate the survey. For mixed farms, so someone with dairy and beef, we'll generate, if there's a substantial beef, if there's a small beef enterprise, no, but if there's a reasonably substantial beef enterprise, it doesn't have to be massive, you'll get a figure for both your cows and milk footprint and also your beef footprint.
And maybe just a related question there, I noted from David Méabh on the questions in relation to the allocation of inputs and outputs to individual enterprises. George, would you comment on that? Does AgNav handle that, and kind of takes it out of the farmer's hands, so to speak?
Yeah, it's doing a really good job allocating it. There's peer-reviewed papers that Jonathan Hearn has been involved with. They're behind, Lawrence Shallure behind it, that are allocating it for us behind the scenes. So it's all done nice and neatly behind the scenes. So it's just giving an individual a total figure, a per hectare figure, and a figure for the per kilo live weight and the per kilo of milk produced. So it's all done for us, Tom.
And just following up on that, George, then there's a good question here in terms of, out of those metrics that are provided to you by AgNav, which one of those is best to go by? Just bearing in mind, like, are we focusing on absolute reduction and then versus the emissions intensity per kilogram of product?
Well, I put my hand up and say that I focus a lot on the per kilo stuff, but Tom tells me I'm wrong. Tom is usually right. Tom tells me that from a national perspective, that it's the absolute figure we need to reduce, because that's what we live or die by as an industry over the next number of years. It'll be the total figure will be the core figure. Yeah.
But I suppose just to come in on that, George, in terms of working with farmers and providing farmers with some sense of a benchmark of where their farm is relative to perhaps the national average in terms of a measure. You can't compare farms on their total emissions, because farm size will have, and scale and level of intensity will have a huge impact on that. But you can give farmers a sense of where they are when you compare their carbon footprints or carbon intensity or emissions per hectare. So in my mind, I think I'm softening a little bit, George. Maybe it has to be a combination of all three metrics: the total emissions, and then your emissions per hectare and per kilo of product.
And then just in terms of, I suppose, some of the other environmentally based programs that we have going on in Teagasc, there's a question there just regarding the likes of the ASSET program that focuses on water quality, and, how will the Signpost program tie in with that to make sure that we're achieving, I suppose, both our water quality targets and our greenhouse gas targets in tandem?
Well, I suppose internally we've close working relations with the ASSET team. That's the first point to make. So what's going on here, the team in ASSET are well aware of what we're doing in the Signpost program. We're all working closely together and trying to coordinate it. The second point to make on it, Méabh, is the fact that a lot of the initiatives that we're taking here, or a lot of the technology that we're trying to get adopted under the Signpost program are actually really compatible with what's going on the ASSET program as well. So they're pretty compatible, to be honest with you, the two programs, and we're working closely together.
Yeah, absolutely. And then just in terms of then you talked about the complications that can be associated with using clover as a measure for reducing greenhouse gases. There's a question there just in terms of using clover on heavier soil types and high organic matter soils, and is that something that's going to be workable?
At the moment, look, I'll be honest with you, we know that a lot of the data that's been generated, the early data that's been generated on clover incorporation has been done in Clonakilty, which is a lovely light free draining farm, and it's also been followed up with work at Moore Park. Just at the moment, we're investigating the incorporation of clover on a heavier farm up in Ballyhaise. No, if you're from Ballyhaise, some people say it's not that heavy, but if you're from Laois, I'll tell you it's a heavy enough soil up there. And look, the early indicators are that it's working pretty well. We'll have a better handle of it in the next year or two, as the results of maybe 3 or 4 years later are pulled together on the incorporation of clover onto heavier farms. Donald Patton would say that he's doing it and it's working for him. We'll know better in the years ahead. I think it'll work. It may require slightly different management to lighter farms, but what that is at the moment, I don't really know. Give us a bit of time, and if we're working on it, I think it'll work. But we just need a bit more time to get it straightened out.
Yeah, and I suppose, like you said, like with clover, it always is a bit of a moving feast, isn't it? Like, different farms are going to behave differently when it comes to clover.
Absolutely.
Yeah, indeed. But I guess the key thing maybe would be to see if we can get it working on some farms on heavier soils and use those as demonstrations. And I guess one of the heavier soils that heavier soils farms that I'm familiar with is Solihead in Tipperary. And our colleague James Humphreys has successfully incorporated clover at a high level, and it's working very well on that particular farm. So there undoubtedly will be farm to farm variations. So, George, there's a question on the chat from I'm after losing it there now. How do farmers contact the new Signpost Climate Action Sustainability Advisors that you've referred to in your presentation?
So the handiest way is just to look up the website, the Teagasc website, and you'll find the contact details for all the Signpost advisors in the different regions listed on that. Now, I'll just go back to a point. I see someone's put in something there, Méabh, about they've applied online and heard nothing. In the next week or so, we'll make sure that everyone who has applied online, the advisors are only just kind of settling into the roles at the moment. We're going to do a big drive at Moore Park to get more people to sign up online. And towards the end of next week, the plan is that we'll put a push on that the advisors, the Signpost advisors, will be in contact with people who signed up online to make sure that they get invited to one of the workshops that's taking place over the next number of weeks. Okay.
Yeah, and I suppose just a very relevant question there as well that's come in a couple of times is this programme only available to Teagasc clients? Is it open to people who engage with private consultants, and how would they engage with it?
We want everyone to engage in the programme, Méabh, because if we're to have an impact on the gaseous emissions from the industry, we need maximum engagement. We're not confining the programme to Teagasc clients. It's free to everyone to participate in the programme, irrespective of who their advisor is. It doesn't have to be a Teagasc advisor, or they don't have to be Teagasc clients to engage in this programme.
I think I better clarify a point that was made earlier, George, in relation to access to AgNav. Our colleague Seamus has messaged me just to remind me that access to AgNav is only available to farmers who are participating through the Signpost Advisory Programme. So at the moment, I think it's what's called a closed pilot. So
no, they're going to open a wider, Tom. I forgot it wasn't out. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I suppose what we're asking is, together with our partners, ICBF and Board BIA, I suppose if farmers can engage with the Signpost Advisory Programme, we'll take them through AgNav for the first occasion, and at a later stage, then they can go back in and look at it themselves. So our colleague Seamus messaged me on that. So
okay.
I see a couple of questions coming in there. Everyone's obviously envious of the Signpost Advisory Programme and what's available through it, because they're asking about availability for I suppose other enterprises other than dairy and beef. So is there advice available there for tillage, sheep, pig, poultry farms, horticulture being asked about there as well?
Yeah, so I'll be honest and say that the most accurate calculations we have at the moment are for dairy and beef, but we'll get those off the ground. We're going to get those off the ground first, because they're going to have the biggest impact on reducing our emissions. But there's ongoing work now. Don't ask me how long it's going to take. I'm not. Maybe Tom knows. There's ongoing work for the other enterprises to bring them into the system as well, and it'll take place over the coming months or year or something like that.
Yeah,
but they will be available. To be honest, they're not quite there at the moment for the other enterprises, to be honest with it.
And I suppose just on that, there is some of them included on your side of things there, Tom, in the Signpost demonstration farms.
So you better put those questions to me, I guess, Méabh, if you want. Yeah, so I think there's a question there about the selection of farmers for the I guess it refers to the Signpost farms. So we have 125 farms that are operating as demonstration farms and are, I suppose, pointing the way forwards in terms of the adoption of the technologies that George referred to in his presentation. How were they selected? They were selected through our local advisory network. So we contacted our advisors spread across the country, and we asked them to identify farmers that could make potential or would be interested in participating as demonstration farmers. We also worked with our partners in the Signpost Programme, so the various milk and meat processors in the main, to select those farmers. So they're separate to what George has described. So the Signpost Advisory Programme is for all farmers.
And just following up on that then, Tom, is there an inclusion of any organic farmers in the Signpost Demonstration Programme?
Yes, we have 5 organic farmers participating in the Signpost Farms Programme. Yeah, we're monitoring those farms and working with those farms in the same way as the other 120 conventional farmers.
And any of the organic non-signpost farmers who want to participate in the program, we want to be delighted to have them on board as well.
Yeah, perfect. I suppose just maybe jumping back to something that you were talking about earlier on, George, in terms of like the importance of the adoption of protected urea. You know, is it something that you would foresee in the future in terms of other straight nitrogen products not being available on the market to try and more so lean people towards protected urea? How do you see that going in the future?
Yeah, so I think what will happen is it's like everything else. I look back over 20 years working with EBI, or 22 or 3 years working on it becomes part of the cultural norm that you do things a certain way. It's amazing the way people forget how things used to be, and what becomes the norm changes over time. And what we're going to see over the next number of years is just a gradual rise, I would say even a substantial increase in the proportion of protected urea used, and it'll become in the next number of years the main nitrogen fertilizer of choice when straight nitrogen is being applied. It's just going to happen, Méabh, and people won't even know it's happening. It's working really well. There's no reason to use any other form of straight nitrogen than protected urea, and it's on a cost per kilo basis. When you allow for the higher utilization rate compared even to conventional urea, it's on neck and neck with conventional urea, even though it's slightly dearer than it. It works out the same per kilo, and it's much cheaper than CAN. It's going to become the urea. It's going to become the nitrogen fertilizer of choice over the next number of years. So cultural things happen over a few years and become the cultural norm. And this is one of those things that's just happened like a train. It reminds me of the early days of EBI in many ways.
Yeah, more of a mindset change, I suppose, that'll take place then. And if, like you said, it'll be the new norm. It
just becomes the new norm. We don't even realize it happens. It just happens. And this is one of those changes that we're in the midst of at the moment. Yeah. It won't even be a debate in a few years' time.
There's just another one there, I think, coming in for you, Tom. In terms of the Signpost demonstration farms, then what ongoing work and research is actually being carried out on those demonstration farms?
So I suppose from a demonstration point of view, I suppose the work is to support and encourage, motivate the demonstration farmers to adopt the technologies that George has referred to. And George had the 12 steps up on screen during his presentation. So, you know, starting from some of the what we consider the easier steps to take, like correcting soil fertility, the application of lime, the adoption of protected urea, and so on, moving up along then to maybe reducing chemical fertilizer nitrogen, and up towards the top of the tree then, you know, better breeding and or top of the stairs, the top of the step, better breeding and the incorporation of clover. And George has already explained, you know, why some of those technologies are considered the first steps to take, and why more of them are considered maybe some of the latter steps to take during a process to reduce emissions. So that's the ongoing work. That's the demonstration piece. In relation to research, I suppose the Signpost farms are involved in a key research experiment started by Teagasc to come up with better estimates of soil carbon sequestration. So how much carbon is being stored in our soils on different types of farms, so a dairy farm versus a beef farm, on different levels of management intensity, so highly stocked versus lowly stocked, on different soil types, you know, mineral soils versus peat soils, and so on. So we've got all those variables across our network of Signpost demonstration farms, and there's an ongoing research experiment that will, in time, so it's a long-term project, but in time we will get a better estimate of the amount of carbon being stored on those soils. And we're also taking measurements on the farms in relation to LiDAR, and that's measuring the above ground biomass so that we can get an estimated amount of carbon stored in the hedgerows. So there are two research experiments that are ongoing on the Signpost farms at the moment.
And I suppose we thought in the news there this week, like just how crucial it is that the research that's being done, that the figures that we're using for calculating our emissions is as accurate as possible, you know. And then George, just in terms of any farmers that are maybe trying to get, you know, they're looking at their own farm and saying, I want to see reductions on my farm. What are the biggest measures that they can implement that'll have the biggest impact on their greenhouse gases that they could put in place for dairy and beef farms, I suppose?
Yeah, for dairy and beef. So I suppose the core areas are around the change of nitrogen use if you're using fertilizers towards, you know, predominantly a protected urea as your key nitrogen. The next element will be around, you know, improving soil fertility, because improving soil fertility through lime and getting your indexes right will also allow the incorporation of clover into the swards, which in turn will reduce the demand for fertilizer nitrogen. And then you have ongoing things. The third key area then is around, you know, better grazing management and better genetics for the herd. Better grazing management will allow animals to become more productive. So we finish our cattle earlier, we produce more milk per cow. And the better genetic elements of it, whether it's beef or dairy, on the dairy side, it's more productive cows and more fertile cows. And on the beef side, it's, you know, earlier finishing. So we have grazing management, but also the genetics to allow us to finish the cattle earlier, because the quicker cattle are slaughtered, the earlier they're slaughtered at, the more efficient their productivity per kilo of live weight gain is. So start with the nitrogen change, work on the soil fertility, and then deliver on, you know, health and better breeding. And I suppose within the better breeding, for example, we have technology there on EBI, we have technology on DBI, and you have the whole opportunity that's coming now at the moment of doing kind of the whole herd genomic analysis to try and establish what are the most superior animals for breeding in the years ahead. Yeah,
so I suppose it's important for the farms to kind of assess where they stand currently first, and then decide where they can go from there. Yeah.
Yeah, and it'll be slightly different for different farms. So if you're not a big nitrogen user, you know, switching to protected peas is important. Protected urea is important, but it mightn't be as important as, you know, better grassland management for you. Do you know what I mean? Things like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the use of the advisors, then the role of the advisors is to tailor a plan for your farm, because change is not easy. But having the advisor on board will help you to facilitate discussion on what's going to work best for you.
Yeah, and then in terms of the 12 steps, George, you know, the 12 steps for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, how was that order actually decided on from 1 to 12, or is it just a guide in general for farmers to use?
Yes, so maybe it's a guide for the individual rather than a definitive list for anyone. For most people, why we put it in that order is it's based on kind of ease of use, and some of the more impactful ones are also down near the bottom. But again, we're back to the advisor, get the advisor to sit down and tailor a plan that suits the individual farmer. I think that's the core, and that's one of the opportunities we have with the Signpost Advisory Programme to do that.
And can I just come in there as well, George? I know I mentioned our colleague Seamus Carney on the broadcast previously, but I'll mention him again. I've seen him facilitate a very engaging exercise with a group of farmers where they're asked to rank the 12 suggested measures themselves and identify for themselves on their own farms what step they would take first. Yeah. So, you know, to me, I think, and it's how our advisors will work, I believe. It's about engaging with the farmer and agreeing with the farmer what steps are most suitable for the farmer's farm, and what steps the farmer is willing to take. You know, we're not trying to force measures on people, but equally we can make recommendations and provide guidance. So yeah.
But Tom, the great thing about the industry we have is that no one is being forced to do anything at the moment. No one is being forced to do anything. And we have a massive opportunity. We have a clear path that people can follow to have a big impact on their gaseous emissions. We're one of the few industries that has a clear pathway like this. And we have a program in place that we need people to engage with. You just start on that journey. and start making the changes that are going to be impactful from an environmental perspective. We have a huge opportunity here in the agriculture industry. I'm really proud of the industry we work in. It's a brilliant industry. We have a path. We need to get on that journey and start moving. And change will happen. She will come.
Yeah, and I suppose just following on from kind of what you were saying, like the change is going to come then, Tom, just in terms of the time frame that we have set out for ourselves, you know, a 25% reduction in agricultural emissions by 2030. You know, it's a challenging target. So there's just a question there. You know, what level of emissions reduction do we realistically see ourselves being able to achieve within that time frame?
Yeah, so Teagasc estimates at the moment would be that we can deliver the 25% reduction, but there are a couple of provisos. One is that there's a stable herd. So, you know, we don't see a massive increase in animal numbers, bovine numbers, mainly. And secondly, that we get a very a high rate of adoption of the technologies that we have mentioned during the presentation. So, you know, and again, as George has said, we have the opportunity now. We want to help farmers. We want to work with farmers to deliver on the national ambition to reduce emissions. Yeah, so it's up to farmers, you know, to make choices. And we believe, based on our estimates and models, that we can deliver the 25% reduction, but it is dependent on a high uptake of the technology, so that we move from, you know, a relatively low level of protected urea use to a much higher level of protected urea use. As one example, that we get much more clover into our grassland swards, that we continue to improve soil fertility, that we reduce fertilizer nitrogen use. So all of the things that George, you know, talked about in his presentation, that I suppose was maybe focused on the individual farmer level, if we can multiply that over many farms, we'll change the figures for the industry. You know, so that's the challenge that's ahead of Teagasc, ahead of George, ahead of myself and yourself, Méabh, to try and work with lots and lots of individual farmers to ensure that the figures for the overall agricultural sector trend downwards.
Yeah. So it's a challenge, but as we've seen before, farmers are more than willing and able to rise to the challenge, I think, once they're given the tools to do it. I suppose that's where we'll come in.
Okay, Méabh, I think we're coming towards the end of our questions. I think we've exhausted most of the questions. So I think it's about time that and we're also coming up against our time. So I'm going to draw this week's webinar to a close. So I found that a very interesting discussion, and a great selection of questions submitted by our audience this morning. So thanks to you for listening and for participating in such a way through the Q&A. Thanks to my colleague George for preparing his presentation and making it this morning, and also to Méabh for your help with the questions. Just to let you know, next Friday, the Signpost Series webinar is entitled Challenges for the Dairy Sector in the Netherlands. So the focus will be on the dairy sector in the Netherlands, and the presenters next Friday morning will be Michael de Haan, who's a researcher from Wageningen Livestock Research in the Netherlands, and he will be joined by a Dutch dairy farmer, I think. Okay, so definitely a Dutch farmer, but I presume a Dutch dairy farmer. And they will both talk about the challenges facing the dairy sector in the Netherlands. And I suppose people have been reading about that or following it on social media. So that could be quite interesting and well worth tuning into. So that's next Friday morning at 9:30. So all that's left for me to do now is to thank you very much for joining us this morning. I hope you enjoyed our presentation and discussion. Equally, I hope you have a great weekend. And my final duty is to thank our production team this morning of Yvonne Marr and Andy Boland.
You've been listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, the weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming. Don't forget to join us live every Friday morning for our latest webinar. For more, visit teagasc.ie. And you can also rate, review, and subscribe to the Signpost Series on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. I'm Mark Gibson, and thanks for listening.